A low winter sun crawled across the cracked concrete yard of Grey Ridge Penitentiary, turning every patch of frost into a trembling sheet of glass. A guard stood motionless in the watchtower, unaware that directly beneath him, in a narrow cell lined with peeling paint and silence, a prisoner pressed his ear to the ground, listening for footsteps above the soil he'd been secretly removing one handful at a time. And the unsettling question that would haunt investigators for years was simple. What kind of mind decides that freedom begins with a spoon? The inmate's name was Eli Mercer, a 33-year-old mechanic from the forgotten outskirts of Spokane Creek, a rural town in northern Idaho where winters were long, trust was thin, and neighbors counted each other's trucks coming and going. Eli grew up with an instinct for fixing broken things. Engines, radios, his mother's rusted washing machine, but somehow never figured out how to fix the broken parts of himself. When Eli was convicted of armed burglary that escalated into a violent confrontation, the courtroom whispered about him. Not dangerous, not unhinged, just strange, calculating. Too calm for a man facing a decade behind high concrete walls. The case never attracted attention. It wasn't sensational enough, too small for national headlines, too quiet for a flashy true crime segment. The town simply labeled him guilty and moved on. But the man they sent to Grey Ridge carried something the prosecutors never mentioned: patience, sharpened by silence. Grey Ridge was the kind of American prison built in the 70s when architects cared more about containment than rehabilitation. Everything inside echoed: doors, voices, hopes. Eli arrived in mid-February with a shaved jawline and blank eyes. He spoke little, followed rules obsessively, and spent most of his free time sketching diagrams of engines on the back of cafeteria slips. The guards assumed he was just another inmate trying not to drown in monotony. But beneath that stillness was a man constructing a blueprint no one could imagine. The spoon came into his life 6 months after his arrival. The cafeteria kept cheap aluminum utensils chained to trays, but the inmates learned how to manipulate nearly everything. A dishwasher named Krantz stole an extra spoon and traded it to Eli for a pack of menthols. To Krantz, it was nothing. To Eli, it was the first gear in a machine only he could see.
Eli became obsessed with the acoustics of his cell. He would tap lightly against the concrete corners, listening for the way sound traveled. His nightly taps annoyed the inmate in the next cell, Laurel Briggs, who often yelled, "Cut that creepy tapping or I'll rip your ears off." Eli ignored her. The taps weren't random. They were measurements, mapping vibrations, density, and the hollow resonance that hinted at old structural flaws in the penitentiary's foundation. Every prison has a weak spot, but not every prisoner has the mind to sense it. Eli found his behind the rusted vent grate on the far side of his cell. Inside the vent, beneath accumulated dust and a century of forgotten repairs, he spotted a hairline fracture, thin enough to hide, but wide enough to promise something on the other side. That night, when Lights Out dropped the cell block into a chorus of snores and whispered arguments, Eli pressed the spoon into the crack and began scraping. Progress was almost invisible. A flake of concrete here, a line of dust there. He learned the rhythm of the night shift, the guard who lingered too long at the vending machine, the one who paced slowly past the cells humming old rock ballads, the one who dozed off with a magazine over his face. He timed every scrape to footsteps, flushing toilets, coughing fits, and the clanking symphony of restless inmates. One mistake could bring everything down. He never made one. The surrounding inmates began to notice changes in him. A quiet fire lit behind his eyes. A strange calm hovered around him, the kind that hinted he knew something they didn't. Laurel, whose anger was as constant as the buzz of fluorescent lights, started watching him work closely at chow. "You think you're special, Mercer?" she asked one day, narrowing her eyes. Elo didn't respond. Another inmate, Caldwell, once whispered to a guard, "That guy's up to something." The guard shrugged. All the inmates were up to something. In Grey Ridge, suspicion was background noise. Eli's progress accelerated during winter storms, when wind smothered sound and guards hurried indoors for warmth. By the first anniversary of his incarceration, he had carved a small opening behind the vent, just wide enough to slip his arm through and feel cold dirt on the other side. The discovery sent a tremor through him. Real earth, real possibility. The smell of soil struck him like a memory of childhood summers, digging with his bare hands at the creek behind his mother's trailer, chasing the idea of treasure. Back then, he believed he'd uncover something that would change everything. Now, he was certain he would.
His mother, Lorraine Mercer, wrote fewer letters as months passed. The last one he received was strangely distant, filled with talk of old family debts and a new tenant renting her spare room. She didn't mention visiting him. She didn't mention missing him. Eli folded that letter so carefully it split at the crease. In quiet moments, he questioned whether freedom was waiting for him outside, or whether he was digging toward a world that no longer cared he existed. Still, his hands kept scraping. The spoon was becoming dull, its edges bent from pressure. He carefully reforged it every few weeks by pressing it under his mattress springs to straighten the angle. The utensil was barely recognizable as something meant for eating. It had become a purpose. The tunnel took shape slowly. Eli spent hours on his stomach, arm reaching into darkness, loosening dirt, pulling debris through the grate, and scattering it under his bed in small cloth bags stitched from old undershirts. Every few days, he would release the soil into the communal yard during exercise time, dribbling it from his sleeves like sand. No one noticed, or perhaps they did and assumed it was just Grey Ridge swallowing pieces of itself.
There were setbacks. Once, he misjudged the angle of the tunnel and struck a pipe. The metal cracked, spraying icy water into the cavity and drowning weeks of progress within seconds. Eli froze, panic thundering through his chest. If the guards discovered the leak's source, everything would end. But luck, or perhaps fate, intervened. The maintenance crew blamed the break on old plumbing. Eli spent the next night shivering in wet clothes, carving again, more desperate than before. Laurel, the inmate next door, became unexpectedly involved. One night, she whispered through the vent, "I hear you digging." Eli paused, fingers dirt-stained and trembling. "If you turn me in," he said quietly, "they'll put me in solitary. That's death for me." There was a long silence. Then Laurel whispered back, "I ain't turning you in, I just want to know where the hell you think you're going." Eli didn't answer. Laurel didn't ask again. What Eli didn't know was that one guard had indeed begun suspecting something. Officer Leland Reeves, a man with a crooked gait and a habit of staring too long at inmates, started lingering near Eli's cell. One morning, Reeves leaned against the bars and said, "You sleep well, Mercer? You look tired." Eli shrugged. Reeves smirked. The tension between them thickened like fog. Reeves wasn't stupid. He had seen men like Eli, men who hid intelligence behind quiet eyes, men who planned. One night, Reeves returned early from his break. Eli was mid-scrape when he heard boots approaching. He froze. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, pausing at his door. Reeves stared at him for several long seconds. Then, without a word, he moved on. Eli's pulse hammered. It was as if the guard had seen something, but chose not to react. Why? Eli wondered about that for hours. The dark side of hope is paranoia, and it began gnawing at him relentlessly. The final breakthrough came unexpectedly. After nearly 18 months of labor, Eli pushed the spoon into the soil and felt it slip into open air. A cavern, maybe natural erosion, maybe an old construction void, waited beyond the narrow passage. He widened the hole with trembling hands and peered into the darkness. It was enough for a body to crawl through.
On a stormy winter night, Eli Mercer finally executed his escape from Grey Ridge Penitentiary after months of digging with nothing but a spoon. He crawled through the narrow tunnel he had carved beneath his cell, nearly succumbing to panic as the earth pressed in around him. Summoning his resolve, he pushed onward until icy air touched his face and he emerged beyond the prison walls, hidden by dead pines and falling snow. With no clear direction and the storm swallowing the landscape, Eli ran blindly into the frozen wilderness, driven only by the determination never to return. By morning, his disappearance triggered an extensive search involving law enforcement, drones, and tracking dogs, yet no definitive trace was found. Speculation spread rapidly. Some believed he froze to death, others thought he reinvented himself under a new identity. Officer Reeves claimed he had long suspected Eli's intentions, though his story raised doubts among investigators. Despite widespread efforts, the truth behind Eli's fate remained elusive. Months later, a ranger discovered a small cloth bag of soil identical to the prison floor and a bent aluminum spoon near a distant riverbank. These items were filed away as part of an unsolved case, and over time the prison itself fell into ruin. Eli's story faded into legend, a haunting reminder of how desperation can fuel extraordinary courage, and how even the most impossible escape can begin with the smallest tool and an unbreakable will for freedom.